All right. What's up, everyone? This is Ryan here, and you are watching episode 33, I believe, of my live stream, Wise Ass Developer Q&A, where we're gonna ramble about Android stuff. So apologies for being a couple minutes late, and also, as you can probably already tell, I'm pretty exhausted. So we'll see how well we do today, but nothing really special planned for this show. I'm just gonna try and answer as many questions as possible. What's up, man? I'm Rat. Yeah, we'll just kind of jump in here. So first and foremost, I just want to thank the following people for supporting me on Patreon. So that's going to be Seth Keegan, Trevor Halvorsen, Bassam Halal, Tina Fredericks, Nanotech, Shadow, Mr. Bidwell, Graham Hertzeg, Sushil Chanda, Elad Stavi, and Shoku Mustofi. So to those people, I say thank you very much. It's much appreciated. And if you'd like to support what I do, there's a couple different ways you can do that. One of the ways is, of course, you could help me out on Patreon, but if you see one of my videos and you want to like and share it on one of your social media platforms or something like that, then that also helps out a lot as well. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. So, one little announcement before we get into Q&A stuff here. So last week on Monday, I basically sat down and had a super long conversation with one of my friends and fellow developer, Darrell. And so basically what I wanted to do was I wanted to sit down and ask Darrell about his projects, his perspective on software architecture, separation of concerns, a whole bunch of things, because I know we've already had these kinds of conversations in the past, so I basically wanted to get them on camera. So anyways, I'm very happy to announce that after a pretty long editing process and a very long recording process, we ended up recording over 3 hours of footage, although we won't end up seeing all the footage. But yeah, very happy to announce that by the end of today and probably pretty shortly after this Q&A, I'll be able to post the first part of that conversation up on the channel. And that first video is going to basically focus on Darrell and I explaining, like I say, software architecture, clean architecture, and separation of concerns. And I think it's going to be a really useful tool for a lot of people because the stuff that we get into is really the fundamental building blocks of, I think, what it means to build good architectures. And really one of the most fundamental things is just separation of concerns. So anyways, I'll shut up about that, or you can ask me in the Q&A here and I'll give some input on it. But yeah, very excited, and there's going to be more videos to come, and hopefully down the road more interviews with Darrell, because the main thing is that I had a really good time. So let's get started here. Let me just pull up. I didn't have a lot of time to prepare because unfortunately moments before this I was trying to sort out some dependency injection stuff, and all of a sudden it was 7:55 and I didn't have anything ready to go, but that's okay. Coding is a totally valid reason. So I see we have a question right off the bat. We'll see. All right, so this question is from Ilya. Let me just increase that font size. Hold on. Let's go to 28. Good. All right, and then also, of course, let's just do that. Perfect. So Ilya asks, and what's up? We got Ilya and Krzysztof. And the question is MVP or Mvvm? That's it. So this is an interesting question. I'm going to ramble about this for a little bit, as usual. So right off the bat, just for the beginners watching, I'll really quickly define what these are. I won't explain them in too much detail here, but so the above are basically what I would call, let's say MVP and Mvvm are GUI architectures. So they're architectures which tend to work really well when you're building things like you normally would as an Android developer, a graphical user interface architecture. And the reason why these things work really well is that Ultimately, what they are, they're a separation of three concerns. And this was, just as a quick side note, so this is one of the things I discussed with Darrell, and I was very, very happy to learn that he actually had come to the same conclusion as I have, that that these sort of three primary responsibilities or concerns actually pop up at multiple different levels of your architecture. But in this case, we're going to be thinking of like a three-layer front-end GUI architecture. So it's a separation of three concerns, and really you can give these concerns different names. I'm just going to give you, in my opinion, the simplest, my simplest version of what they are, but there's, of course, the view. Let's call this the UI, but you can think view. Stuff to do with the user interface. We've got like what I'll call application logic. So this is basically going to be the stuff that kind of drives the, it's going to do a lot of thinking. It's going to tell the view what to do probably, or expose data to the view. And it's kind of a middle person. And then of course we have data / or we can say state. Or we can say model. I'm really not super fond of the term model to describe the entire, I don't know, that's getting really nitpicky, but anyway, so let's stop rambling, Ryan. So that's basically what both MVP and Mvvm are. So what we have a situation here is we basically have two different ways to do something very similar. Now, how exactly are they different? In a nutshell, what I would say is, and here's the thing about this stuff, you're going to hear different opinions, particularly with model view, view model. Model view, view model is not a very well-defined architecture, just so people are aware, but let me tell you kind of the specific thing you kind of need for it to be model view, view model. So in MVP, what I'll say is view. By the way, I will answer this eventually. I just want to kind of make this educational for people. But so view, in model view presenter, view depends on, sorry, let me rephrase that. Presenter depends on the view. And what that means is, if we were to think of this in software architecture terms, there would be an arrow going from the presenter to the view. So the presenter, and now normally that'll be an interface, but the presenter talks to the view, simply put. In Mvvm, view model, which is a similar idea, and part of the reason why I don't like the name view model, because it's neither really yeah, it might contain a representation of the view's data, but also you're either going to need a presenter or some kind of controller in here. So view model is a slightly misleading name, but again, whatever. So view model exposes data to the view. Now the key difference here is that in model view, view model, your presenter, or let's just say your logic class, so I want to get away from the stupid names here, your logic class, which coordinates the UI, instead of directly telling the UI class what to do, so I'm thinking activity or fragment, instead of directly telling it what to do, it exposes data to it. It says, eh. So what does that kind of look like? The way I like to represent this is actually a diagram I was working on a little while ago, but as you can see, so sorry, I'll try and bring that into focus. Also, just so everyone's aware, I was born with hand tremors, so if you see me shaking all the time, I literally shake all the time. It's not just major drug addiction. Anyways, as you can kind of see here, some of these arrows have this weird eye thing, and some are just lines. Sorry, I'm trying to get that to focus, but it's not really, doesn't want to do it for me. Come on, you bugger. Whatever, I think you can basically get the idea here. And this, so this little symbol here, this eye symbol, is basically representative of the observer pattern. So in a nutshell, exposes data to the view via something like observer pattern. You can also use data binding. I tend to usually use a reactive library like RxJava, but you can use other methods. You can use data binding, works as well. I should probably use data binding for simpler projects. Anyways, so that's basically in a nutshell what Model View Presenter and Model View View Model, how they're actually different. Now, there's a reason why I gave that long preamble, and part of that preamble to summarize is that when we're thinking about these things, Model View Presenter, Model View View Model, early on in the beginning, I was trying to ask the question, I just want to know which is the best one, which might be what maybe is Ilya's just asking me to compare them or whatever, but that was one thing I wanted to know is, what is the best thing? Well, I have unfortunately two not so great answers to that. So, well, I wouldn't say not so great, just answers that I didn't expect to be the case. So, number one, which is better? To answer that, depends on your requirements and use cases. So whether Model View View Model or Model View Presenter could be considered better is partly going to be dictated by the particular requirements of your project. Now, these are very difficult sort of things to put into words, but one thing I might say is, for example, when I'm thinking, do I want to use Model View Presenter or do I want to use Model View View Model, I want to know, okay, well, what's different? We already talked about that. The difference is the presenter can tell the view what to do directly, which means you can kind of have more fine-grained control on it in some ways. For Model View View Model, one of our key benefits is we can have sort of like a many-to-one ratio of basically views to view models. And that's because the view model never depends explicitly on a particular view. So those are the kinds of things you want to ask yourself and be like, okay, based on my project's requirements, would it be an advantage to not depend upon the view? A lot of it's going to depend on personal style. Like, I like to have, I'll generally go with Model View Presenter because I like kind of fine-grained control on the view. But here's the thing about all this, like, all this discussion, I can sit here and I can compare these two incomplete architectures, because what I'm finding is actually pure MVP and pure Mvvm, neither of these things actually really, let me rephrase it. What I would say is over time I'm moving more towards something like this. So I'll try and make a digital version of this so people can see it better. But what we have is like view adapter, view controller, view model, and presenter. So I'm not just arbitrarily adding these things, but what I'm getting at here is depending on what your requirements or use cases are, maybe model, like kind of what I'm going for now is model, what I would call maybe model view, model view presenter, view controller. Is that it? Pretty much, yeah. With adapters as necessary. So this is, so anyways, hopefully you kind of understand what I'm getting. The point I'm trying to get at here is, when I used to look at these kinds of things, these three-layer architectures, and I still do think it's useful to be able to understand what is Model View Presenter, what is Model View Model, but I no longer look at these architectures as comparing two different things so much as, and then trying to say one is better than the other, so much as, okay, when do I think it would be useful to have a view controller or a view model? Now, I'm not trying to confuse anyone here, and like, ultimately what I will say is if you're an Android developer and you're kind of a beginner, basically you're going to want to pick one of these. There's also Model View Intent by Hannes Dorfman. I think I'm missing a couple of dots. I might be missing 2 dots over that. Oh, and apologies. Let me just look his name up really quickly. Hannes Dorfman. It's a very German name. Yeah, I actually spelled that correctly, surprisingly. So there's another 3-layer architecture called Model View Intent that I've heard about. I understand a little bit about it, but I haven't actually, I don't know enough to actually break it down for you, but that's also another one worth checking into. It's apparently based on a JavaScript sort of, I think it's a Cycle.js, I don't know, some JavaScript stuff. Anyways, yeah, so hopefully that kind of answers the question, do I prefer MVP or Mvvm? Really what it comes down to is what I think is the A. I don't really think of my architectures as they're either MVP or either Mvvm. Those are parts of an architecture. And which one is better, I think that's going to be based on your understanding of the project's requirements, your personal preferences, things of that nature. So anyways, yeah, the most important thing is you never want to be sort of arbitrarily adding things in. So it's good to kind of start with something like this, and as you sort of grow your understanding, you can move to a more diffused kind of architecture. Anyways, I think I've rambled enough about that. Hopefully that was interesting. So what else have we got? So I've got a question from Kareem, and I'm just kind of wondering, like, so the question is, what is the best backend language for Android, and which backend technologies do I use? And my question, so by backend, do you mean cloud services, like a web app, or do you mean just the backend, say, like, if we're thinking Model View Presenter, sort of the model, or what I would call the data module. Another reason why I hate the name model. The data module of an application, like the database, network adapter, that kind of stuff. Just so I can give you a clearer answer here. Awesome, I'm glad that was helpful, Ilya. By the way, I see we got like 16 people watching, but I've only had about 2 questions so far. So beginners, what I would ask is, you know, if you've got some general questions here, go ahead. If your English isn't that great, that's okay. I'm not going to make fun of you, but let's get some friggin' questions going here, ladies and gentlemen. Anyways, so Kareem clarified that it is the data module that he's asking about, so let's just figure that. Okay, so this question is from Kareem, and the question, just paraphrased it a little bit, but it's what is the best backend language and technologies for Android? So I'm going to kind of assume you're probably not an Android, you're probably learning Android. So, which will change a little bit how I answer this question. So what I would say on Android for writing the backend of your phone, if you want to get an idea of this, I'll start by just giving you some code examples. So in the description box down below, you're going to find links to a number of my open source repositories. And what I would suggest is, if you're kind of curious, you can jump into almost any one of them and you'll pretty much see the same stuff. The only difference is that basically, I would say for languages, Here's the thing, like you're asking what is the best, and like I say, that's going to depend on factors which are going to change between individuals, but I have the most experience with Java and Kotlin. And Kotlin is, of course, most people will know this by now, but Kotlin is basically new, let's just call it new Java. It's a lot more than that, but that's basically the idea behind it is, and it's interoperable with Java. So for languages, to write the back end of a typical Android app would be the same language that I use to write the rest of the application. And so that's kind of all I can say for the first part of this question is what's the best back-end language? Well, what you're comfortable writing in. I would say Kotlin or Java. I can give you a little bit better answers for technologies for back-end things. So there's a couple different things that you're going to want to think about. And again, like what I would suggest is, for example, I've got Android REST tutorial where I show some REST stuff. I've got my Room database tutorial. I've got Pos Trainer, which uses Realm. Let me start listing these out, and hopefully I'm answering your question. If not, please feel free to clarify, Kareem. But so for backend technologies, for database, you're going to want either Room, platform, SQL-based, yeah, database solution. So there's Room is the first one. So this is basically what I would call the platform solution. This is the solution that basically the Android team is behind and developing, Room. It's part of Android architecture components. You've got Realm, which is a NoSQL based, I'll say database. Probably a better name would be I don't know. Anyways, a NoSQL based database, which is come on brain, available on a number of platforms. So that's one benefit of Realm, is if you're doing say you've got an iOS app and you've got an Android app and maybe a web app, you can use Realm with it's cross-platform compatible. So those are going to kind of be your main options I would recommend. There's more out there, but those are kind of the primary ones. For, say, REST, you're going to want, most people will usually do retrofit plus OK HTTP. So basically, retrofit allows you to basically, retrofit is an annotation based, how can I phrase it, REST adapter library. OK HTTP is, of course, is an HTTP client. And those two things together are going to basically allow you to communicate with the REST endpoint quite easily. You might also use Volley. So that's, again, going to be the platform solution. Those are kind of the main things that you're going to need. So hopefully that's an adequate answer for your question. And if not, you can ask for more clarification or anything like that. But that's basically what I would say. This is what you're going to want to look at for backend technologies. For most things you'll need to do, and generally you're going to need to do a database or some kind of REST adapter. Yep. Anyways, I'm just going to run a quick commercial break, and then we'll get to some more questions. All right. Yeah, I can, so I've got a request from one of my regular viewers, and she's asking if I could have a look at one of my friend Darrell's projects. So, advantage of having separate modules. Okay, so what I can do, a big part of the interview I did with and discussion with Darrell on Monday was going through his project. So what I'll do is I will release sort of basically Darrell. We recorded over 2 hours of footage of Darrell kind of walking me through his project. So what I'll say is I'm happy to do a quick tour right now, but just understand that there's a lot of content where we really go into, you know, what is an entity, the domain layer, like all those really key questions for an advanced clean architecture. So that footage will be coming out eventually. So I won't spend too much time, but I can certainly have a quick look and just kind of riff on this stuff a little bit. So DB weather. And of course, Darrell has very kindly made this project open source, so you can also check this out if you're curious. This is one of my favorite repositories to look at, so I would suggest it. Now, it is Kotlin based. Okay. So just give me a moment here. So this repository is called DB weather. And so the question, let me just write the question out really quick here. So okay, let's see here. All right, can you give us a quick tour of one of Sorry, it's complicated subject matter, so this is going to take a moment, so please be patient, everyone. All right, so okay, here we go. So the question is basically, let me just. So the question is basically, Tina asks, can we have a quick tour of one of Darrell's repos, and what is the advantage of having a data module and a domain module? So the repository I'll be looking at is DB weather, and what I'll do is, if you want to, you know, Darrell's currently in the chat if you have questions for him, or if you want to check this repository out, I'll post the link just in the chat right now. And so the main question, so this will be quite an experience for beginners, because what we're going to look at is in a moment is a very highly a project which is very clean, and that's kind of a technical term, and has really incredible separation of concerns, and that was one of the main things that Darrell and I talked about. But anyways, I'll try and talk about some useful information here. So like I say, we're going to get into this in fine detail in the video, but the main question Tina was kind of asking was, what are the benefits, can we do a quick tour, and what are the benefits of multi-module projects? So what I'll first do is let me explain what a multi-module project is, and then we'll have a quick look at the different modules Darrell has set up, and I'll try and briefly summarize why it might be a good idea to do that. So very briefly, so Gradle plus Android Studio allows a person to make multi-module projects relatively easy. So what is a module? Well, okay, so if you're a beginner Android developer, you've probably worked with single module projects most of the time. And what I will say is it's possible to build an enormous project in one module. What we'll see is that's not necessarily the most optimal thing to do, but I'll kind of leave that for a moment. But just really quickly, what is this module business? So just really simply, whenever you open up an Android project and you see, for example, you see several of these things which appear to be like little mini applications, more or less. Sorry, if you see these kinds of things popping up, normally you'll just see app, but here we have a couple different modules. So if you want a basic idea of how to do that, what you can do is in Android Studio, you can go to File, Project Structure, and then you're going to see a list of modules in the application. So in this particular application I've opened, there's only one, which is what Android Studio will automatically generate for you. And another quick way to check the modules is to go to the which one is it? Settings.gradle in the highest level of your project, and you'll see separate modules included here. Let me just see, I don't think I do have a multi-module project open right now, so let's just jump right into Darrell's repo, because otherwise it'll take a long time to load. So right off the bat, if I open up the, actually it doesn't look like Darrell's included settings.gradle, but that's okay. But if you were to open it up, what you would see is it's a these are different modules, is what I'm trying to say, and taking very long to say it. So we've got app, we've got DB weather common, data, domain, news, weather. Now, one of the things you'll see is, and this is one of the new things I learned from Darrell, is he's actually moving towards doing more than just presentation, domain, and data. I believe the term was module by feature, and I just want to mention that that's something he's moving towards and something I'm interested in. I'm not trying to scare the shit out of people with that, but what I would say, let's just start with the basics, like let's head to maybe an older commit here, November. And let's go to browse files. So this is the previous commit to that project, and what you'll see is there's 3 main modules. In the newer commit, he's trying out something new, but this is kind of what Tino was most likely talking about, and this is one way to do it. Now, I just want to take a moment to mention, earlier you heard me rambling about Model View Presenter and Model View View Model. I got asked which one is better, and one of the things I mentioned is that you can kind of look at those as a separation of 3 main concerns, and that's also what's going on in terms of these 3 modules. So we're separating app or presentation from data and domain. So why would you want to separate these things into different modules? This one's kind of difficult for me to unpack right off the top of my head, so let's just see where I get with this. But I'll try to, let me try and think of like a high level analogy. What we're going for is you almost want to think of your application as being, I'm trying to think, what are the words I could use? Not like different microservices, but what you want to think is you've got like your domain, which is going to be describing the fundamental data and the fundamental actions or things that your app will do. And what I mean by that is if I open up domain here, we're going to see use cases, which basically describe things that the app does. And then we're going to see entities, which describe sort of models, data models, I'll call them, which basically describe like the important data, describe the data used by the problem domain. We're getting into some kind of slightly more advanced topics, so I'm going to have to assume you know what a data model is. You have a relative idea of what the problem domain is. When I say problem domain, I mean like more or less, I've never heard a very strict definition, but what I would say is the data, the relevant information in a kind of high-level abstract way, the relevant information of an application and the relevant sort of actions this application must take. And what I mean by that is, say we have a note-taking app. A note-taking app is going to need to save notes. So that's a use case, save notes. It's going to need to create note. So that's a use case, create notes. And for example, if I open up use cases in here, we're going to see, for example, for the weather feature, get locations, get weather. So these are all actions, get something, do something, remove something kind of thing. So it turns out that when we put that kind of stuff, which every application is going to need, what we don't want is a situation where all of that, which doesn't really change, is determined by implementation specific things. So that's probably going to sound vague. What I mean by that is we can know as a use case, what can we say here? We can know based on our problem domain, which is what we're talking. Oh, I'm so sorry. I was in rambling mode here. We can know based on what is contained in the problem domain or the domain layer what the app needs to do. However, we're not looking at implementation. Why do we want to hide the implementation from the general idea, the abstraction of what our app does? Because if we hide it, if we put the data over here, and then we have this big abstract high-level thing here, and then we put the presentation logic over here, so the presentation doesn't know exactly how the database does what it needs to do. The database doesn't know what the presentation needs. If we separate all these things, we can change them easily. We can test them easily. We can compile them separately and test run. We can compile our, we could, for example, compile just our DB weather data module and test it. So the last thing I'll talk about is this data model. This data module. So I want you to think of domain as like a collection of high-level sort of instructions and objects which define the problem domain. And then you've got the data module, which is essentially, we're thinking implementations now. So, for example, Darrell has, so a perfect example, if you want to be able to have a local and remote repository, so we have again, off the top of my head, where are the, so for example, we've got a repository. So this is what probably, if I recall correctly, what the use case will talk to is an abstraction, a repository. Actually, no, this is an implementation, so it wouldn't be, is it proxies? We go through this in the video, but just suffice it to say, for example, we've got our domain talking to one sort of news object, but behind that news object is like a local and a remote data source, for example. So that's one of the things where we're totally decoupling our implementation, which could include a local room database. It could include a cloud realm database. I don't know. I don't care. The domain doesn't know. The domain doesn't care. As long as whatever this implementation is conforms to the contract. So hopefully that kind of explains the general gist, but what I would say is we're going to be, like I say, we've recorded a ton of footage on this, and I'm really excited to go over that. And basically it's going to be a big breakdown of all these topics, and hopefully that'll clarify a lot of stuff for beginners and intermediates alike. Anyways, that was a mouthful. Just going to run a quick commercial break. All right. So, just a quick, Darrell's just expanding on the use case idea in the chat. And so just a comment, Ilya is saying, oh my God, there's so many things I don't know. So Ilya, what I would suggest to you is like, don't feel super bad. The thing we just talked about is like a highly modularized, highly architected, clean architecture, which is definitely like we're going to a new level from like Model View Presenter. That's why. So again, earlier on, I was rambling. I was rambling about the fact that I don't actually really even think of my architecture like just Model View Presenter or Model View View Model, because those are, in my opinion, at this point, necessarily incomplete architectures. You need more than just a Model View Presenter for the entire app, and you need more than just Model View View Model for the entire app if you want to really follow separation of concerns. Like in Model View View Model, I'm sorry, either you need to make a view controller as well, or you need to have a view model which is also a view controller. I don't think you can have it either way. Either that or Model View View Model is, sorry, View Model is just not a good name for it, because it's more than just a view model, or you need a view controller. So I don't know. Anyways, point being, the further I get in my understanding of these architectures, the less I think of it like one single 3-layer thing, and more of like, let's separate all the concerns of the application into individual things that have specific responsibilities. Anyways, let's see what else we got. This is just a quick question. Dvorak mentions he's noticed that I'm not really that into UI and UX, and look, I do put effort into my user interfaces. But you're absolutely right, Devor. It's really not something I'm super interested in compared with back-end stuff. And as a result of that, I just don't put as much time into it, which is just human nature. But what I would say is my primary resource for learning UI and UX, other than just building them, is just the material design .io website, the material design specification. If you just Google material design specification, and a lot of people don't like my answer to this because they want like a tutorial or or something like that. And to be perfectly honest, I've I've never paid for a course or a tutorial or anything like that, and I don't plan to, because the thing about user interface stuff is that really how I think a person should go about learning it is just find cool examples you like and then try and replicate them. And that's how I approach it, and that's worked well enough so far. Like, I do have some decent user interfaces, but you're absolutely right, Devor. It's UI and UX is very much the thing I have to do, not the thing I want to do when it comes to building applications. Whereas when it comes to software architecture, as you can probably tell, I'll talk about it for hours. I don't care, but try and get me to talk about user interface, and I could talk about maybe principles behind it, but as far as like actually learning it, not the best person to ask. You're absolutely right. All right. All right, so Chase Olson is upset that I skipped his question, so let's go back to that. All right, so Chase asks, hey, how are you doing? I'm doing pretty good. Not bad. What are your favorite features of Kotlin? So that's see, I did skip your question earlier because this is the kind of thing that I would have to think about for a little bit. It's not a bad question. It's just I'll have to. These questions can be a little bit difficult the first time I try and answer them. But what are some favorite features of Kotlin? Well, there's a couple things. Let me just try and give a couple. So first and foremost, I really love things like when. Like the difference between writing what I will call, where's the friggin' note thing? Cool features of Kotlin. So writing what I'll call control logic. So we're thinking if, when, loops, lops, etc. That kind of stuff is way better in Kotlin than Java. This is one, so don't get me wrong, if you're watching this and you've never seen this before, I'm not a Java hater. But anyone who's worked in Java knows and has written a bit of Kotlin has figured out that, listen, like writing this kind of stuff, like this when clause, like instead of having to do like all this other garbage, or here's another example. I have this is in Kotlin calculator. I haven't actually committed the latest commit because I'm still working on this project, but if I go to calculator impl, I think. Yeah, this was one of the coolest things. So I endeavored to write my own math evaluator, which accepts the string and breaks it down into operators and operands. And then it'll sort of get a list, and it turns it from I think what you call a infix notation expression to I think a postfix expression. I don't know. I don't give a shit about the jargon. I just write the friggin' code and solve the problem. But anyway, so for example, writing try writing this kind of thing in Java. Like we've got a list of operators where I have to write a regex to basically split the function. And then I'm using like Kotlin. I don't actually know. I don't know if these are called operators themselves, but this is almost RxJava-like code. And so we're saying split this expression into split this expression based on numbers. So which is what that //d means. If you're not familiar with regex, unfortunately I can't explain it, but it's a way to examine strings. And then filter out empty emissions, and then emit everything as a mutable list. So, and this is all Kotlin here. And so then we output it I create an output which is like an empty list, an empty mutable list, and then from this list here, operators, I map to a new list. I map from operators to output. And so what's happening in here is I'm creating a new object for each emission based on each I don't actually know index for each index. So anyways, what that little code snippet does is, like, if you were to try and write all of that in Java, it would take forever, and I probably wouldn't have even bothered. I would have just given up. So this is an example where you can really use Kotlin to really improve your verbosity. The question was, what are my favorite features of Kotlin so far? Definitely, you can write stuff way faster than Java. That's just sorry, I almost swore. That's just a fact. Sorry, I don't set out to swear, but anyways, so that's one thing. Number one, you can write code way faster most of the time. So that's cool. Now, as one caveat, one thing I don't like about Kotlin and Android Studio right now is that it's taking a lot longer to compile, and my unit tests are potentially taking 8 minutes to compile. So I don't think that's really Kotlin's fault, but there have been some things frustrating me lately which have sort of nullified the advantage of writing code faster. But anyways, I'll figure out what the actual problem is before I complain, because it might just be my own configuration. So that's one of them. You can write things a lot faster. What's another thing? What do I like about Kotlin? Yeah, that's one of the main things. Kotlin extensions are pretty cool. So instead of having to write all that find view by ID boilerplate nonsense, you can, if you go into your build Gradle file and you add Kotlin Android extensions to it, what you can do is you can then say, if you have some kind of view hierarchy, you can import it up here as a synthetic property. Once you've got that done, you can refer directly to the XML. You don't need to type find view by ID. This is in Android extensions. So this is really cool because all of a sudden I go from having to write like find view by ID, cast it, blah, 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 then set the on-click listener, to just directly setting an on-click listener right here. Now I need to test this to make sure it works properly, but this is pretty damn cool, I would say. And if you're wondering where this name comes from and why it's ugly, and this is, you know, I don't know if there's anyone listening on the team, but it would be cool if you could create like aliases. The reason why this is totally not Kotlin or Java camel case is because if I open up, this would be calculator fragment, fragment. Basically what I'm referring to is the actual ID. And so either what I plan to do here is, where did I go? Where's the fragment? Is it over here? Yep. I'll basically plan to either change the way I name these things in XML, or it would be nice if there's some way to kind of like rename these things, but it's a minor issue. So that's probably off the top of my head the main things I would kind of point out. I feel like I'm missing a lot of things, but what I would say is that there are issues with Android Studio and Kotlin. I'm getting issues and compile times that I just didn't get when I was working with Java. And part of that is that I guess Kotlin, of course, needs to be compiled into Java, as far as I'm aware, and then we compile the Java from there. So naturally, it's going to take a little bit longer to build, but I one thing that's been frustrating me a lot lately, and I don't know why this started happening, because this was not actually something I dealt with before. But if I open up my unit tests, I'm not going to run them. But you know, I try and do a good job, and I try to write tests for anything that I think needs to be tested. And one of the issues I've been having with Kotlin is that these unit tests on occasion take in excess of 10 minutes to compile. And what appears to be happening is that the particular Gradle task assemble debug or assemble debug unit test, for some reason it takes like 8 minutes sometimes. It doesn't crash, it just takes forever, and I don't understand why it's doing that. It doesn't make sense to me, and it's really annoying because I can't use unit tests as part of my regular programming flow if they don't execute in like 30 seconds or whatever, because then it takes the point out of writing the unit tests. Like, you're supposed to write the unit tests to help you write the code faster. So anyways, this is just kind of a gripe, and this is an ongoing thing. So if anyone knows, if anyone has had this issue as well, please let me know. It's frustrating. Like, I just want to run my friggin' unit tests, basically, without having to wait 10 minutes. And with Java, of course, it would take maybe like, I don't know, usually 15 seconds to run the whole test suite. Like, even running, on occasion, even running, where's the really small one? On occasion, even running something this small will take forever to compile. So I've tried different things to fix this, like running the tests, setting, if I go to File Settings, I've tried setting the Gradle to offline work, and I've tried setting the compiler to offline as well. And neither of those really have been helping me properly. So, so yeah, I don't really know what the deal is there, and I'm going to keep looking into it, but I just thought I'd ramble about that. So anyways, back to questions. Sorry about that. I just wanted to complain about something. All right. So I got a whole bunch of questions while I was away. So let me just run one last commercial break, and then so if you've enjoyed the show so far, please do me a favor and hit the like button down below and consider subscribing as well. And let's just run a quick commercial. Sorry, I'll wait a moment just because the ad's playing. So Abhishek says that I skipped his question about working with Node.js in Android, and the reason why I skipped your question, my friend, is because I haven't worked in Node.js, so I'm not the one you want to be asking about that. Rui Fair. I can kind of answer that quickly, I guess. Let me paraphrase your question a little bit here, Rui. And again, really sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Okay. Okay. So the question was, so what would the question, Rui asked, it's kind of a, oops, sorry. Yeah. It was kind of a big question. Part of it involved storing something in a PHP myadmin, I'm definitely, I don't think I'll ever be a PHP guy. That's not likely. But the other part of the question was, do I have a recommendation on saving data on a cloud server? So I'm going to answer this from the perspective of someone who is an Android developer first, more than say like a web developer perspective, and that's basically you're either going to want to use Firebase or you could use Amazon Web Services, and that's really all I can help you here. I would recommend either Firebase or Amazon Web Services. You can write your own solution in JavaScript libraries and whatever you want to do. Just for me, I generally, A, I'm not really experienced in that, and B, I don't really want to have to think about writing that on top of my application. But it is something I would like to get into. Like, I will be moving to web development very soon. But, well, not very soon, but, you know, within a year. But that's what I would suggest for you, and that's really all the only useful thing I can say on that topic. But there we go, I answered your question. People are like really want those answers today. Okay. Let's just do, I think, one more question here. Let's do, what's this one? Krzysztof. Oh yeah, I was gonna say. So Krzysztof asked if Kotlin is gonna have a feature in web development, and I was just about to say ask Darrell, and then Darrell already answered, and the answer is yes. Kotlin HTML and Kotlin JavaScript. I saw a question here and now I lost it, which I was going to answer. Where is it? Prepare for an interview. Sorry, just give me one moment. Un moment, s'il vous plaît. All right. This is good. I've done a lot of sort of technical questions, so I think this is a good one to kind of end on here, which is... Okay. Oh my god, I gotta stop opening that. There we go. All right, Amrat asks, how do you prepare for an interview? All right, good question. So, oh, sorry, kicked my microphone here. Okay, so the question we have right now is from Amrat, and he is asking me, how do you prepare for the interview? So this is my German accent. I like to practice sometimes, but es ist nicht so gut. Es tut mir leid. Okay, so how do you prepare for an interview? This is a good question. Let me give my mind a moment to... my mind is buffering resources on how to prepare for an interview. Just drink some more coffee. Oh yeah. Okay. Amrat asks, how do you prepare for an interview? So the answer I'm going to give to this might be a little bit different from the answer that people might be expecting, and so this answer is largely going to be based on personal experience from successful interviews I've had, and also just experience in general from doing a lot more than just Android interviews. And to give you an idea of why I think I'm qualified to talk about this, I had my first job when I was 12 years old, which I know to a lot of people listening does not sound that spectacular, but if you grow up in North America, that's a little bit earlier than usual. And I'm 24 right now, so I've basically been in the workforce for more than 12 years. And I've been through many interviews with many companies and many industries, including, I think I've been through about 6 developer interviews so far for various positions. So one of the most recent interviews I had where I really killed it, what I'll do is I'll explain the things I did leading up to that interview that made that go really well. And it is an Android developer interview, but I can't give you too many details on it. So what I'll say is, so most tech interviews have kind of 3 phases. So you've got your application / first interview. You'll probably have a coding challenge, and you'll probably have like a final interview. Although depending, by the time you submit your coding challenge, they'll probably make the decision there for the most part, but you know, whatever. So generally speaking, for tech interviews, you're going to have those 3 steps, and you're going to want to focus on, depending on your skills, you're going to want to focus on different things. So here's the thing about this, man. I don't have a degree. So when I'm walking into a tech job, if I don't walk in there, if my application to this job does not include my repositories, which include generally a great description of my ability to use industry standard libraries and concepts and architectures. So what I'm saying here is, if you're like me and you don't have a degree, you're going to want to just, before you even start applying to places, have at least one project on GitHub that can kind of demonstrate that you can at least build an app. If you're applying, that's like a junior level thing. If you're applying for more advanced positions, you're going to want, I've got a pretty big portfolio of projects I can talk about and explain and demonstrate. So to prepare for an interview, what I'll say is, number 1, have code available for the company to look at. And you know, what quality you'll need is going to depend on whether you're applying as a junior developer or an intermediate or a senior. You know, if you're a senior developer, you're going to want to be able to demonstrate some large projects which have a decent number of downloads and stuff like that. So have code available to look at. And so that's the first thing. Try to understand this code very well instead of trying to cram generic interview questions. Like you might get the generic interview questions, so you'll get the thing, why should you always give every XML thing an ID, or what is an activity? You'll get like the generic stuff, especially if you're in a junior developer position. Don't try and, I don't recommend studying for specific answers like that so much as try and build a lot of code and understand the code from the code itself. Be able to explain what an activity is based on your use case for it. So when I'm going into an interview and they ask me what is an activity, I'm going to like briefly explain, well, it's sort of a class which has a life cycle. However, how I use my activities is essentially a container, which is a technical term, and then I'll elaborate, and then that's a container for the rest of my components, and I can kind of elaborate, and we can get away from saying just, what is an activity? It is this. And then I can start unpacking my understanding. So, but that's dependent on me actually understanding my code well. Because if you understand your code well, in the interview, you can share your understanding, and that's a lot more valuable than reciting canned answers. So number 2, come to the first interview, really all of them, in a very good mindset. So for me, this is going to depend on you, but before any interview, I will, this is something I do a lot. I'm not trying to preach here, but I'll generally meditate. Like say the day before, so day before, day / whatever, morning before any interview, I will meditate. That's something I do every day. I will basically encourage, this is getting really nerdy and technical, but I'll either fast or eat a low carb diet. This will help your brain work a lot faster. One of the most, the best interview I ever did, I solved problems on the fly. And that was when I was really in ketosis. If you've maybe heard, you can look up ketosis and effect on cognition. I was really in ketosis, and you can do this through fasting or low carb diet. That day, my interview was at like 2 and I didn't eat any food. I just had coffee and some salt water. So my brain was working really, really well. So I get into the interview and they ask me a question. I'm just like, boom, here's the answer. So what I'm trying to say, get your head right is, okay, day, morning before any interview, I will try to get my head right. Maybe exercise. So anyways, it doesn't actually matter. Just what I'm trying to say here is, calm your mind. Calm down before the interview, because when you get into the interview, you're stressed out. And what happens when you're stressed out? Fuck you. Sorry. I love scaring seagulls. I apologize about that. Anyways. So before the interview, calm down. When your brain is calm, you think better. When your brain is agitated, then you're thinking more in your like limbic system, your lizard brain. So that's an important one. And that's the main thing. 3, and this is the last thing I will say. And this is probably one of the most useful practical things I can give you. For almost any company, they will list APIs and concepts which they would like to see you have. So when you check almost any job posting, Android developer, they're going to say, would be nice to have, say, for example, RxJava experience. Some people would be like model view VM, blah, 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 and MVP. They'll have like unit tests. Excuse me. Sorry, I had a hair in my tongue here. So you're going to have, for almost any job application, they'll tell you what they want to see. So if you can walk into an interview or send an application with, like I say, with code, your code on a repository that demonstrates the exact things that they want to see, that's really going to help you. And if you've written it in code, when they ask you questions, you're going to be able to give good answers. So those are basically the main things that I would recommend for anyone preparing for an interview. So just to summarize really quickly, in terms of preparations, write code, have a decent amount of code available, because listen, if you put me in an interview room for like, say, an intermediate Android developer, and I've written all this code and I have all these repositories and several published projects beside someone who has a degree that hasn't actually written a huge amount of code, I'm going to eat that person alive. They might eat me alive if the question is like, how would you write a binary search tree in C kind of thing? Then they'll kick my ass. But when it comes to like job-specific skills, like writing Android apps, that's what I do. That's my specialty. So I need the code and understanding to be able to back that up. Secondly, get your head right before the interview. And getting your head right is not cramming stuff in your head just before. Don't Google top 10 interview questions an hour before the interview and be like, oh, I got to memorize these. An hour before the interview, I want you to do nothing except calm yourself. Relax. You might not get the job. You might get the job. If you're in a calm state of mind, you're going to give better answers. You're going to seem like a more collected person, even though it's totally bullshit. And you're going to impress people more. Like when I get into a code interview and I've like meditated for 30 minutes and I'm listening to the interviewer just like just like that, it kind of confuses people. They're like, whoa, this guy's really present or some shit. I don't know. Anyways, hopefully that kind of answers your question. So that's going to be the last question I answer for today, but I'll stick around for a couple minutes and ramble if there's any kind of discussions and stuff like that. So yeah, what is I'll kind of just put this out there. What are some interview tips from some of the viewers here? What do you guys do? Ilya has mentioned that he recommends glycine, which is an amino acid, which is good for the brain. I haven't actually heard of glycine myself, but I do. One thing I do quite regularly is I'll eat. They're kind of gross, I'll be honest, but I'll eat like tins of sardines. And the reason why I do that is in order to have your brain work really optimally, you want to be eating basically either salmon or some kind of sardines. Sardines are just a lot cheaper and you can just, pop them out of the can and they don't taste so nice most of the time, but I look at it as like almost a vitamin supplement. Some of my meals aren't actually going to taste amazing. A lot of them do, but if you're someone who's as obsessed about nutrient density as I am, then sardines are an excellent substitute for, say, eating salmon a couple times a week. And then that's going to give you the amino acids, the important omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, and a bunch of stuff like that. So I'll try and eat a couple tins of those a week. Different stuff like that. All right, everyone. So looks like that's basically it for the questions. Unfortunately, I'm not going to do any more technical questions here. But yeah, hopefully that's been a decent episode. For those who might be just watching, I got a question earlier, which was MVP or MVM. And I think I got into some important topics there. So if you want to watch the recorded version later, you might want to check out this one because I feel like I did touch on... this is a very common question that I get. Should I do MVP or MVVM? And it's a very complicated kind of thing to unpack. So anyways, that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. A good episode today. If you want to ramble at me or get help from people like Darrell and so forth, then go ahead and join the Slack channel. Link in the description box down below. It's free. Don't be an asshole or I'll kick you. And... what else? So just so everyone knows kind of what I'm doing, I'm basically really in the... sorry, I'm swearing a lot. Not trying to. I'm really busy with editing, and I'm trying to finish off the Kotlin calculator app, and I'm basically looking for a new job. Actually, it's amusing that someone did ask a question about working as a remote developer, and I have been applying to positions like that. So if I get one of those positions, I'd be happy to talk about that application process. But I am looking for a job myself right now, and I also have to move probably at the end of February. So what I'm trying to say to people is I'm going to try and keep active, and I will keep working on content, but Unfortunately, life is kind of forcing my hand a little bit, so I got to kind of focus on that stuff. So what I'm trying to say is I might not be super active with responding to people on Slack and stuff like that. I will try to be, but I really have to put blinders on and solve this issue first. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and peace out.